You know, with Japan, we have a deal, which is a very interesting one. And I love Japan. We have a great relationship with Japan, but we have an interesting deal with Japan that we have to protect them, but they don't have to protect us. Do you know that? That's the way the deal reads. We have to protect Japan, but under no circumstances do they have to protect us. I actually ask, who makes these deals?
The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people and organisations who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in your world in 2026, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members. We've decided to start thanking them at the top of the show because we really do appreciate your support. And we've actually had quite a few new sign-ups to our paid membership in the last few weeks, including Gus, Claudia, Campbell Hughes, Jacinta Emakora, Billy Bob, Michael Cooney Jr., Talia Rose, Andy, and James. If you want to join those wonderful supporters of our podcast and financially support our show so we can continue to produce great episodes each week, then we encourage you to click on the link in the show notes and subscribe to the Patreon of Socially Democratic. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode. Okay, we're taping this one on a Tuesday evening on the lands of the Arawak people in Kingston, Jamaica, which is also home to the descendants of millions of people trafficked through the West African slave trade and impacted by colonial rule. And it's December. And for those that follow the pod know that at the end of the year, we do our annual wrap of the year episodes that cover Australian politics, a bit of Victorian politics, a bit of international politics, and also some pop culture episodes that we chuck in over the sort of Christmas break while you're all at the beach. And joining me today to wrap the year in international politics is our regular guest on the pod for US politics. She's also the senior vice president of a Democratic strategic communications firm. But in her day job, she also is a senior advisor for candidates and campaigns on nearly every continent of this globe. So therefore, she is so well placed to take us around the globe and cover the state of Labor and Social Democratic parties and also their rivals. Katie Parsons, welcome back to Socially Democratic.
Thank you. Thanks. It's great to be back. I can't believe it's already the end of the year, that it's been a year. But here we are.
I think we did a chat, from memory, we did like a US politics check-in at some point this year, right? And I don't even know when that was because every day seems like a month in US politics.
Exactly. Yeah, we did, but I only remember that because I checked before this. I was like, when did we last do this? And it was sometime this summer. But yeah, right. It's been a while.
Wonderful. Well, it's good to have you back. There's a lot to go through. I'm looking at the run sheet right now and thinking, I don't know if we're going to get all of this done in an hour, but we will try. So let's go on a bit of a globe-trotting experience of the political situations in a whole bunch of different countries. And I think perhaps we can start in Europe. It's always just an interesting place to start simply because there are so many countries, and that means there are usually a good couple of elections that are happening in each year. And we've certainly had that in the case of Europe. Let's start in Britain and then sort of move east perhaps.
Sure.
As a starting point, even though we talk about Europe and, technically is Britain in Europe anymore? I don't know. But I don't know how much you've been covering, British politics in the last 12 months, but certainly I know a lot of our listeners, particularly our Patreon listeners, write in a lot about what is going on with the Labor Party in the UK, particularly after they had that historic landslide victory and Keir Starmer became the Prime Minister after such a long time with the Tories, just going through more prime ministers than some baseball teams go through managers. And then now it's looking like a complete disaster. I mean, what do you make of what's happening in the UK right now?
Yeah, it's so surprising, or it has been to me. This UK politics I have followed a little bit less than usual this year, at least not in the level of fine detail that I have in the past. So the couple times that I've tuned in, sort of like, wait a second, wait, didn't they win like in a landslide, exactly like you said, last summer? And actually, I had just arrived in London on election day last year, so got to celebrate that victory with a bunch of friends, which was really satisfying. So yeah, it's been a huge turn of events. But then I think, if you think back to how things were going even then, and I think many of us said at the time, it's not so clear that Labor really won that election so much as conservatives lost. And I think maybe what we're seeing is really kind of an outcome of that, which is Labor weren't necessarily especially strong. Just people were really, really tired of the Tories. And so as Labor's had a hard time delivering, as has every government who's in government because of global issues, is sort of the same thing we saw last year. It's hard for them to deliver on the kind of promises that they made to get elected. And instead of the public bolstering them or even shifting support back to the Tories, they're just moving away from traditional parties towards what's the party of the day under Farage? Now it's Reform, but he's had many other names for his political entity, and I think that's sort of my gloss over what I think is happening there. But I'm actually curious what you see in finer detail.
Yeah, the things that I find interesting are, to your point, I agree. The Conservatives lost the election more than Labor won, and there was such a disdain for the way that the Tories had run Westminster that you could just see this strategic voting happening up and down the country that meant that it kind of overinflated Labor's popularity in terms of the amount of seats that they actually won. It wasn't like a sort of a 97 Tony Blair election where overwhelmingly, their primary vote was super high. And their primary vote wasn't super high in this instance. And so a lot of people were just going, I'm just not voting for, the Tories in this instance. So they got the benefit of that. And then I think that I wonder, did that set the Starmer government up to fail in some sense because they never really went to the electorate with a clear agenda and a set of clear, concrete ideas about how they can actually fix Britain? And so what we've seen subsequently in that time is that they don't have the initiative. They've struggled to, grasp the initiative. And there's been this vacuum of ideas. Plus, a whole bunch of issues have cropped up, in particular around immigration. When I say immigration being an issue, the perception of immigration being an issue, I don't know whether or not there's a lot of statistics that says, well, immigration actually is an issue in the UK, but certain identities and elements within the media and in the public and personalities have whipped it up that people would start to think it is an issue, and therefore the problems that they're experiencing in their own lives, they're now doing that old, card of blaming the other. And Labor has been unable to address that because they've kind of been sitting on their hands, really. And I know that Labor politicians will point to some of the initiatives that they have got through, but this issue of immigration has overwhelmed their ability to cut through and get their messages out about what we've done in terms of jobs and job growth and wages and trying to address inflation. But I also sort of think that, good governments hit the ground running. When they get in, they're like, right, we are going to really set the agenda. We've got all the resources available to us. We are going to use those resources to dominate the media cycle, to use all of those, hundreds of new MPs we've got in these constituencies to, megaphone these core messages that we want to communicate to the electorate about why you voted for us and that we're delivering on it. And I think that the thing that's really hurting this government was their inability to show that they were delivering on the things that they say that they would do. And what happened is Farage has grabbed that and said, I'm the panacea to all of your problems.
Right. And I think, it's common themes across every country we'll talk about today, that you've got the traditional parties that everybody's really sick and tired of. Support is moving towards populists, often towards kind of ethno-nationalist populists, which Farage definitely falls under. You're seeing support that used to go to Labour shifting to the Greens for the first time in Britain. But I think, sorry, just back to what you were saying about nobody's been out front defending. I think, look at the leader, right? Keir Starmer became the leader as a response to Corbyn, right? So he's the anti-Corbyn, which is no longer relevant in any sense, right? Oh, that's all ancient history at this point. But that's still the candidate that they went forward with, and he's, by all accounts, a lovely person, but not exactly the guy to stand up and give a passionate, defense of whatever it is that they're proposing. And unfortunately, or not, I guess, now we are in the time of passionate politicians. That's what people want to see, is somebody who's, bombastic and really making the case for whatever it is they're selling.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I took away from we're over in the States last month with the US mission and meeting with folks from the DNC and meeting with folks from, say, the Center for American Progress, and a lot of the research they were doing around effective communication, particularly in the digital space, was, vertical, authentic, articulate messages from candidates. And I just wonder if you were to, you do that old question of a candidate, why do you want to be Prime Minister? I don't know if Keir Starmer actually knows the answer to that. And that really worries me.
It's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember what I was listening to recently. Somebody was evaluating Starmer, and something about him having said, well, if I'm not the right person, then I'm happy to go, which is like, again, as a human being, probably a very good way to look at things. As the leader of a party, pretty disastrous. You have to be, you have to wake up eager to take on the day and believe in yourself fully to be able to do this job successfully as leader of any country, so it's sort of disastrous.
And look, this is something that's not necessarily familiar to US-based politics, but certainly happens in far more parliamentary-based politics, where you can flip a leader without going to the polls, right? So, but I'm interested in your outsider's perspective of that, because in Australia, unfortunately, we have too much history of knifing our leaders, whether they're prime ministers or opposition leaders. And I don't know if it's ever necessarily a good thing. It's certainly not a good thing for democracy, but I don't know if it's a good thing for parties either. But the minute you start talking about who else is going to be the leader, I feel like it's the rot is set in, particularly if you're in Starmer's office, right? It's like, oh, now we are literally, bunkering down, and we're just trying to protect our leader from the bombs raining in on them. And I don't know how you get out of that rut. It's remarkable to think that this is happening within the first 12 months of his prime ministership. And they're 5-year terms, right? And I think one thing that the British public probably one of the reasons why they're moving away from the two major parties is because the Tories just spent the last however many years flipping leaders, Oh
yeah, every couple months or weeks, depending on.
So there's the sort of the pragmatist in me who's used to Labor Party politics, flipping leaders, saying, you know what, Keir, if you don't want it, we'll find someone else that does want it, right? But at the same time, I'm like going, if we start this cycle, when does it end? Is that going to work? And I just wonder what you make of that, given that in the United States, this doesn't tend to happen.
Right. Well, I mean, not to get too deep into government structural nerdery, which is a path I'd love to walk with you, but maybe not everybody gets excited about that. I mean, it is interesting because, right, in a parliamentary system, presumably there's a platform, like really people care about the platform. They actually talk about it. There's an expectation that you've made these commitments and you're going to deliver on those. And I think there's just much more tradition of scrutiny about whether a party has been able to deliver on that platform than there is certainly for American presidents. I think often going into the election, most people assume that the president is going to do about like 20% of what they say in the U.S. There's no expectation that everything is, and often, although there is a technical party platform, if you asked anybody what's on it, who designed it, where it lives, that doesn't really happen here. So I think the question is like, has the UK, have other countries gone, are you starting to shift more towards US style elections and leadership decisions where voters are really not paying attention to the platform and they're actually just focused on the leader? And I think there was a lot of debate to be had about that. But I think from an outsider's perspective, I think there's actually something really powerful about people voting and saying, these are the things that we want to happen. We've made that clear. Who delivers it? Maybe that doesn't matter as much. But I don't know how patient people are really to believe that, a new leader is going to be able to deliver on that.
And the idea of this sort of presidential style politics that, we're also familiar with in the United States, but is less a feature in parliamentary democracies, is a good segue into the Netherlands, because October this year they had elections, and I've with my Dunn Street hat on, I've had the pleasure of doing a bit of work with the PVDR, the Labour Party in the Netherlands through the years, and seeing the rise of Geert Wilders, then the Party for Freedom, or the PVV, the far right party, to the point where then he becomes the prime minister at the last election, but was unable to hold this coalition together, and it collapses. And then we go to the polls in late October this year, and D66 get elected. This sort of central. Well, actually, you know what? I'm going to get you to explain who D66 is, because we were talking off air about the last time you checked in on D66 was when you were in college in Europe, and they were these kind of guys. And now it's like, oh, what? They're sort of the governing party now in the Netherlands. Who was D66 for the folks at home that aren't aware?
Yeah. The back when I was in grad school, so this would have been like the early 2010s, working on some projects focused on like observing democracies in other places. Anyway, there were these couple guys who were like, yeah, we're part of this party. You won't have heard of it. Essentially, they're true liberals, right? They're I would say in the European sense, I guess you probably don't have a big American audience, but in the sense of free markets, but also very little regulation of how you live your life culturally and socially, also very liberal. And so to see them pick up, but I think more importantly, they just didn't have a lot of political power. It was a bunch of political outsiders who somehow have managed to cobble together enough votes to actually be in the majority. Beyond that, honestly, I haven't followed them super closely because they were a non-entity. Yeah.
And you're right. They were a non-entity, like sort of, you're talking to the Labor folks in the Netherlands. They were sort of like, D66, they're kind of annoying because they're stealing a little bit of our more intellectual, progressive, academic, university educated voter. But talk about getting someone who can lead the ticket and then inspire a group of people. The leader of the Democrat 66, Rob Jetten, he's this hot gay dude. Like, he is a good-looking man, right? He's young, he's incredibly articulate, and he's a great communicator. And I was speaking, most of us in Dutch, but talking to some of my friends saying, like, what was he like on the stump? They're like, no, he was really good. Like, he just he got the attention of the electorate, and the things that he was saying resonated with people. And that's why they had this massive surge. We're talking about, like, what are some of the reasons why you win campaigns? Sometimes it just is someone, a good communicator at the top of the ticket, a good looking, and I don't mean just in terms of superficial looks, but, the way that they present themselves is so important. And it's worked in the Netherlands at a time when people looked at the far right and they, they were in there for like 20 minutes and people were like, nah, this isn't working for us.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another, I think, really common theme looking across many places, not even just limited to Europe. It seems like the left right now is doing particularly well when we have a unusually strong candidate. I mean, candidates always matter, obviously, but I think that they're overperforming the party when we've got somebody who is really charismatic and dynamic, more so than on the right.
On party brand. Why do you reckon that is? Why do you think when you've got a stronger candidate, they're outperforming the party vote, so to speak?
I think people are really skeptical and tired of traditional parties. Again, this seems to be a pretty universal situation where the old parties, whatever they are, have had corruption scandals. There's a sense that they only serve the elites. Often both right and left parties are seen as only serving the elites, but different elites. And so there's just no more patience for the traditional parties. But when you have somebody who is charismatic and can signal trust and change, often there's something about them that makes them atypical as a candidate, even if they're running within a traditional party. That those seem to be the people who are winning. And in some ways that's nothing new. If you look at Obama or Clinton in the U.S. context, and anywhere else, it's the outsiders who often win. But those seem to be right now. We're kind of going back and forth between either parties that are completely outside the norm, or if the traditional parties win, they've got a leader who's outside the norm.
Yeah, I also wonder on top of that. I agree with that, but building on that as well, I worry about. And it could be a party of the left, the center left, or a party of the center right. So the more traditional mainstream parties that struggle when that they've both got a leader that can't communicate with the electorate, but also they are bereft of ideas that appeal to this majority of voters. And I know that in non-Australian, most non-Australian electorates is not compulsory elections, but even still, appealing to people with a set of ideas that connect with them and that deal with their everyday lives. So when they have that 20 minutes, they all of a sudden they decide they're going to pay attention. They're looking for the things that are going to resonate with them and actually address the immediate challenges that they're facing, whether it be economic or social or whatever it may be. And I don't want to single out any particular political parties, particularly in Europe, but where I've had experience, and I'm not, but I've just sort of found in some instances that some political parties in Europe have become disconnected with what was their traditional bases. So like blue collar working class voters, but
Absolutely.
also, more what I guess you call the sort of intelligentsia, the inner city liberal elites as well. So we're losing votes to, green type parties, but we're also losing votes to either the centre right or hard right as well. And I think it's not. I don't want to simplify why it's happening, but a part of it is I don't think the parties are connected enough to know these are the ideas that we need to take to the electorate. Because I read some of the ideas that they're taking to the electorate, I'm going, that's bonkers. Like, who gives a shit about that? That's sort of particular. Okay, I will have a crack at one person. The former leader of the Labor Party in the Netherlands was obsessed with European green politics. He wanted to do the Green New Deal because he saw that was popular in the United States amongst certain cohort of voters. And I had arguments with folks when I was in the Netherlands going, what about jobs and job creation and infrastructure and farming and all the other issues that I'm getting a sense just from only being in your country for 20 minutes that is being thrown at me all the time. Like, what does the Labor Party have to say on that? And they were kind of like, oh, no, that's not what we want to talk about. I'm going, well, you should be talking about the things that the voters want to talk about, right? And that's what I worry about broadly.
No, I agree. I mean, it's astonishing to see how much, how many of the little parties, the splinter parties in Europe are focused really narrowly in some cases on just being anti-environmental policies and specifically anti-EU, very much because of the impact of those policies, perceived or real, on jobs, on cost of living, energy costs, transportation costs, all of those things. So that it's to not recognize that that's a live debate and that that's, really real for voters. It's not just, even people who may agree that we're headed towards or already in climate catastrophe, they still need to eat and have a job and all those things. So it feels like leaders of many left parties, including the Democrats in the U.S., are just sort of 5 to 10 years behind.
Yeah.
We're reacting to the way that people felt in the past and haven't quite caught up to what everybody's really talking about now. And some of that is about, living and operating in bubbles, sometimes geographically quite distant from, common the regular folks. The media fracturing, all of those things that actually makes it possible for them to be pretty oblivious to what other people are actually talking about.
Yeah. And I think one thing that I've noticed when I was in Germany earlier in the year, that the SPD, who lost heavily at the last German elections, and obviously the AfD, which is the far right, had a really good result. They're doing a lot of internal soul searching right now, and one of the things they want to focus on is we need to get back out into those communities and actually find out exactly what's going on and how we can meet that moment. And that's reassuring. Like, they're actually trying to build a big program to do that and actually incorporate organising into it as well, which is really, really reassuring.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be fair to SPD in Germany, they when they won in the previous election, they were pretty laser focused on cost of living, or maybe not cost of living, but sort of everyday people issues, maintaining stability. That's everybody, because it was the next government coming after Merkel. Like, who's going to be the person who keeps this stability going?
Yeah.
And the world changed. A lot of their loss I would attribute to global forces, again, just inflation, Ukraine and Russia. I think anybody who was in power was probably going to be pushed out. And so I know we were thinking about, if you look globally, winners and losers, where's the left winning and losing? And the fact that they managed to at least stay in government in coalition with CDU is honestly a pretty good result, given how difficult the circumstances were going into the election for them.
Can we, for a moment, just sort of talk a little bit about Germany in terms of the AfD and the implications that would have on Europe if they were to get into power in Germany? I don't know how much you know about them, and I didn't really know a lot about them myself, but talking to some folks on the ground, the history of this party, they started small, and their first leader, who, is a right-wing nut job, they got rolled by new caucus members that came into the party when they had a good win, and so telling that leader, you're not right-wing enough, out you go. And then they elected a new leader, and then they go to the next elections, they elect more people, and then they do the same thing. They say to that leader, you're not right-wing enough. And they keep on repeating this cycle of getting more and more and more right-wing as they move through and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm thinking and the guy that got at the moment, they're really worried because he's reasonably articulate. He comes from a migrant background. So folks are kind of starting to, what happens to Europe if they become, because Germany's so important, right?
Right. And like so many of the populist parties, in some ways, they're doing the right thing, which is focusing on the issues that regular folks are dealing with on a day-to-day basis and really laser focused on those messages. On the other hand, they are extreme ethno-nationalists, anti-Islam, very happy to say really racist and vile things. It's not just it's not just in the quiet corners that they say these things, that's the quiet part out loud. So they're I think anytime one of those parties wins, it just gives license to similar parties in other nearby countries, and it demonstrates to everyone, hey, we're on the rise. And so you see the boats rising kind of across Europe as similar parties do well. But what would it mean if they actually got into? I mean, actually, the one sort of beneficial thing in some ways in Germany is that because of their own history, like with literal Nazis, there's a much more solid firewall between working for the mainstream parties have really said, like, we will never work with AfD or any of these neo-Nazi parties, which has been said by mainstream parties in other countries, but then when they need that support to actually form a government, all of a sudden, things change. So I think it will still be difficult for the AfD to find themselves in government unless they win a really solid majority, which they haven't done yet. But they're very antagonistic towards the EU. It would be like another Orbán or Fico or one of these other Eastern European governments that is really anti-EU and essentially working to dismantle any of their efforts from the inside out, I think is what you would find. I don't know if they would manage to actually take Germany out of the EU, at least in its current state. But we'll see. In 4 years, things may be different, and that may be more plausible too.
Yeah. That's a good segue into Central Europe, and let's move towards Hungary. They're not having elections until next year, and obviously Viktor Orbán has been leader of the country since 2010. I'm going to put my hand up here and say I'm not overtly familiar with what's going on in Hungary, so I'm looking to you, Katie, to tell us what are the prospects of what's going to happen in Hungary going forward.
Yeah, well, I have done some work in Hungary, and it's funny, they've been talking about trying to come together, the smaller parties, tactical voting, to oust Orbán for at least the last 3 elections, and with very different results each time. The last election was sort of the closest it seemed they had come. All of the little minor parties came together into one big coalition. Unfortunately, they also brought in Jobbik, which is essentially like bringing the AfD into your anti-government coalition. So that really kind of poisoned the coalition party for many people on the left, and then on the right, where people who were Jobbik voters, and it is actually it was quite a powerful party. In rural locations, even though the party had said that they were part of the coalition, many of their voters just went ahead and voted for Fidesz, for Orbán anyway. So, we went into the election last time thinking, oh, finally, Orbán's going to be out. We're going to win a majority and all of this. And not only did we not win a majority, Fidesz picked up several more seats. They have, I think, a supermajority in the current government. So they've been in a really strong position for the last 4 years. However, yet again, we go into the election saying maybe this time it's actually going to work, but not because so much of the tactical voting, but really many of the same forces you're seeing everywhere else. Orbán has had a hard time because of corruption scandals. Inflation is, as painful there as it is anywhere else. And so people are frustrated with him. And then we've got this new charismatic guy who's launched himself into the public view. His name is Peter Magyar. And he's actually fairly conservative. This is not like we're getting a great labor leader who may defeat Orbán, but he's really focused on cost of living issues. He's steering away from any social or cultural issues, which could be a source of real major cleavage kind of between the left and right. And some of the smaller parties have decided not to put up candidates for the next election. So it is in effect some tactical voting, but it's not as widespread. So, there's a chance again that somebody actually could oust him, and I think we'll probably touch on this more. This is where you start to see Trump interfering pretty directly and blatantly in the politics there. He invited Orbán to visit the U.S. Just about a month ago. That always, well, not bizarrely, it seems to boost a sitting president or prime minister's polling, kind of regardless of how popular or unpopular Trump is. I guess it makes them seem important when their leader gets invited to the U.S. And Orbán has also started promising to spend lots of money, which is starting to see his polling rise. So I think we've been burned too many times. It's a little bit of Lucy with the football situation. I'm not going to say that we're definitely going to manage to see the end of him this time, but it's maybe the closest it's been in a while.
Katie, I think you've touched on something that I hadn't considered. It doesn't matter whether you're on the left or the right, but if you go visit Trump, then things are going to go well for you at home. Like, like you said, we are going to touch on it later on, but obviously we saw it in Canada. And even in Australia, like the Australian media were goading Albanese to go meet Trump because they thought it was going to be an absolute disaster, and they wanted to get in the room and ask all these prickly questions on Israel and Palestine, and China and our relationship with China, because obviously it's our largest trading partner, and just drive a wedge between Trump and Albanese, and it went swimmingly well. And it went so well, the media was so furious, and it did really well for us back home. People were like, oh, Albo did a great job with Trump. Good on him, and the poll numbers are holding up for us. Meanwhile, you can be Viktor Orbán and go over there as well, and things can do well for you too. So what's in the water in the White House right now for leaders from overseas?
Yeah, I don't know. It is kind of bizarre, particularly given that it seems to be also true even when Trump eviscerates the leader of a country. Then it gets everybody backing their person. This happened. Well, I guess Lula didn't actually come to the White House yet, but having Trump attack him directly has been the best thing for his polling in Brazil. In at least a year. So, it seems to be like any interaction with him is a good sign for polling. I'm sure there are counter examples, but I don't know them.
Yeah. And we're not going to talk about them because they'll undermine our theory. Romania, apart from having a really good football team in the 1990s, what can you tell us about the politics of Romania this year?
Yeah, so this is a crazy one. We actually talked about this last year because right before we talked last year, Romania had their parliamentary elections, or the presidential elections, sorry. But the results were annulled because Russia interfered so blatantly that a candidate essentially nobody had ever heard of managed to win, very far right wing, over multiple other right wing candidates who were better known. So the national courts there annulled the results. They ran it all again this year. And the person who won, Dunn, actually is the pro-EU, pro-Ukraine candidate. Everybody really breathed a huge sigh of relief that the right-wing guy, Simeon, he was one of the main candidates the first time around. He's the right-wing guy that everybody thought was going to do well the first time. And he did end up coming through in the runoff. So it was the two of them. And Nico Dunn, he was the mayor of Bucharest and was really seen as an anti-corruption outsider candidate. He was very popular, and he hadn't run the first time around. And so I think it's really important to note because, again, this was a case of a really strong candidate who was able to tap into the same passions that the right-wing populists have been able to stir up in people, right? That sense of being against corruption, that all the main guys are serving the elites. He was able to deliver the same message while also still being more traditional or supporting more traditional policies, and also still supporting membership in the EU and actually continuing support for Ukraine. So I don't know how much to attribute really that Romanians are super excited about the EU so much as that they had a great candidate and somebody better to vote for this time around.
Do we get excited and draw too much from this result in Romania as a sort of a crystal ball into the future of Eastern European elections going forward? Like, are we seeing a rejection of sort of Russian interference and influence in Eastern European politics?
I think there's no clear winner yet. In every election, you're seeing Russia often interfering significantly. The degree to which that actually impacts the results is different. And obviously in Romania, I think that was the most extreme result that we've seen. And so perhaps there was more of a backlash because they were able to redo it and say, like, no, we're not going to be controlled by Russia. But there was still plenty of support for the anti-EU, anti-Ukraine, essentially, party there. And then if you look around, even Magyar, who I mentioned before, in Hungary, he's not been a big supporter of providing more financial or military support for Ukraine. And some of the other folks who are winning in Eastern and Central Europe are definitely pro-Putin. So I would say that it's kind of swinging back and forth depending on the election and the country.
Yeah. When I was in I was in Paris. I feel like I've been traveling a lot lately. Now I'm sounding like a wanker because I'm just now dropping cities and countries. But anyway, it is what it is. I was talking to a friend of mine, an organizer friend of mine in Paris earlier in the year, and she was saying, and her role is running or part of a sort of a pan-European community organizing peak network. So sort of trying to work with folks that are doing organizing right across Europe. And she said it's such it's a challenge there's this challenge I'd never conceived because she's in Western Europe. And a lot of the folks that she's supporting and organizing with have a very not a very anti-American view, but certainly less favorable view to the United States and this idea of capitalism and that them being this sort of imperial dominating global power. And that's prevalent throughout all of those different groups in Western Europe. And she said, if you move across into Eastern Europe, where groups are organizing as well, and they are of the left, they're like, no, man, we need as much capitalism as we can get because we've spent so long under the jackboot of totalitarian communism that we're trying to move. We need more and more capitalism. And for her, as sort of in charge of this peak body, trying to wrestle this. And I'm interested in your reflections on that when we look at Romania and a lot of those other countries, what kind of work do we need to do to support them? Because are we on the West? How out of touch are we with what their lived experience is from a political standpoint?
Yeah. This is a huge issue, and part of why you're seeing the right do so well in Central and Eastern Europe, and much more diversity of parties and viewpoints within the right, because the left is so tainted from the time of Soviet bloc era. Even once the wall fell and these countries became democracies, the parties that stuck around on the left were mostly the Social Democrats or socialists explicitly, and it was the same people, right? So it's
just change the uniforms.
Right. And so a lot of the deepest corruption really lived in those parties, and people were frustrated and felt like they weren't serving them. And they've just lost credibility in many cases. And so you're starting to see like little splinter groups on the left form, but they're mostly more along the lines of Greens or just like very niche, very left-wing parties that are forming to support those issues. And anybody who you'd see as more of like center left, center right, in the middle, who's pro capitalism, is lumped into a party that is more seen as on the right, just because of the tradition of perceived corruption. So what do we need to do there? I think if you want to see a resurgence of the left, you need to have new parties that are no longer attached to the old history, but they need to be more broadly. They need to appeal to a broader audience, let's say. And that is going to mean that They're more pro-business, but also pro-EU, which, many parties on the right are not supporting.
Let's get on a plane and get out of Europe and fly across to East Asia and to a place that actually I also visited this year, Japan. They've got a new prime minister. They've got their very first woman prime minister. And Japanese politics is fascinating. It's kind of hard to get your head around. It's so settled is the best way to describe it. But what do you make of the rise of Sanae Takaichi to the prime ministership in Japan?
Yeah, well, I think unfortunately, the grim view from a woman's perspective is that when the men fuck everything else up, they'll finally elect a woman. So the LDP, which she's now the leader of the LDP, they've been in power essentially forever. Last year, they had an election and had their worst result, or second worst result since the end of the Second World War. The first time they're still leading government, but they're out of majority. So, in that context, a woman was able to win. She's actually, her name has been in the mix for a while. She was one of the candidates discussed, I think, even before going into the election last year. So she's a known entity. But she's a nationalist, she's very conservative, very traditional. It's not exactly like a great win for the left that this woman won, though it is obviously always nice to see a lady on the top.
The other thing I noticed from her election, it was starting to happen a little bit more in recent sort of last 2 or 3 years with Japanese politics, and even talking to Japanese friends who would be more centrist, this cynicism towards the United States and the relationship they have with the United States. And you wouldn't normally think that would be a thing, certainly from the center-right. The relationship between the United States and Japan since the war has been such a bedrock of diplomacy, particularly for the United States' engagement into that part of the world. And that always worried me a little bit. I don't know, do you get a read on whether or not that relationship is going to improve under her leadership, or where is that heading?
Yeah, gosh, that's a great question. I think that she is probably the type of candidate that the Trump administration would like. And so you will see friendliness from the administration, which would hopefully help to mend some of that. A lot of the source in some quarters, well, I think it's kind of two things. One is military and one is economic. On the national security side, part of Japan's constitution states that they cannot have an offensive military. They're only able to build defensive capability. And there's no surprise who wrote that constitution. It was the Americans. So we said, after the war, you can't remilitarize to a certain degree. Now you've got an administration an American administration who is insisting that every other ally, or that all of our allies, be more responsible for their self-defense, for their protection. So I think they're getting really mixed messages in a sense, and they don't know if they can rely on us to come to the rescue if China starts to mess around in Taiwan or expand its reach in the South China Seas, right? All of which are really important to Japan. So I think there's, a certain sense that they restrained their own development for our interests, and now maybe we can't be relied upon. Similarly, for on the economic side, Trump's efforts to rebalance the trade deficit essentially is going to damage or make it harder for them to sell exports here. And you're seeing that with the tariffs, same way it is everywhere else. But we are a major destination market for Japan. And so I think there's just a lot of understandable frustration.
Trump and his almost Ron Burgundy moment. I can't remember when it happened. It must have been this year when he was complaining about why is the United States spending so much money in protecting Japan? Why haven't they bothered going and getting their own military to support themselves? And someone had to sort of elbow him saying, that was us, Mr. President.
My God.
We wrote it into their constitution that they can't do that. Man, that was like, just read a brief. Just
really.
Anyway.
Unbelievable.
Let's look at the elections that were in China just recently. Only joking, they haven't had any since the 1930s. So let's keep on moving to the Americas, starting with Canada. We obviously covered that. I think we covered that earlier in this year, or
Yeah.
We did, right?
Right.
Yeah. I want to get a health check on Mark Carney and the Liberals and how they're going, because to be honest, I haven't been paying attention. I'm a little bit occupied with other things, but your northern neighbours, and I'm interested in get a sense of, are the Liberals still doing well? Because obviously that was such a meteoric rise for the Liberals in that switch from Trudeau to Carney. Because when Trudeau was leader, it looked like all was lost. Carney gets elected, he picks a fight with Trump, and all of a sudden there's this that Canadians are swept up in this sense of national pride against your strongest ally, and Carney gets elected. Where are they now?
Yeah, they're still doing well. They're still running about, like 50% support, which is pretty high for government in office, at least over here. I think the Conservatives have had a really hard time defining themselves because of the continued antagonism between the U.S. and Canada. I mean, it didn't end after Carney's election. Trump has continued to sort of poke Canada in the eye every couple of months. It seems like anything that happens north of the border that pisses him off is some reason for him to threaten more tariffs. He pulled out of trade negotiations because of a TV ad that was run in Ontario. It was, I don't know who paid for it, if it was like the Ontario government or something. It wasn't a national party run ad, but oh man, it really punched all the buttons. It was an anti-tariff ad, and it used quotes from Reagan about why tariffs are bad. And I think they might have tried to get it on air in the US, like running it within the media markets that would reach Americans. And it pissed him off so much that he pulled out of trade negotiations for a little bit. Now they're back in it. He's threatening to pull out of the US MCA, the Mexico-Canada agreement, which would be really catastrophic. I mean, we get, I think we account for like 75% of Canada's exports. So it will make a huge impact on their market if we really do significantly change that balance of trade. And that, I think, I don't want to say that's the only thing bolstering Carney, but it has made it really hard for the Conservatives to like define themselves as an opposition in that context.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because they really put all their chips on that part of the table before the election, and then it. I don't want to continue with some sort of gambling analogy, but that house of cards fell down, and similar to here in Australia as well. Leading up to the election in May this year, the Conservatives, the Liberal Party in Australia, had really tried to present themselves as Timu Trump. And then the trade war happened, and the tariffs, and it's just blown up in their face. Do you know what I'm interested in getting your thoughts on it is what's going on in Argentina? Because you got that libertarian Javier, is it Milei? Yeah. He won again in their midterms. He's got a strong alliance with Trump. There was stuff in the New York Times there a while ago about this sort of relationship with someone. Tell me about this. Like a buddy of Trump's who's got investments in Argentina, and Milei's basically pulled the wool out from underneath Trump. What happened there? Like, I'm not completely across.
I'm not sure about that. No, they continue to be best buds in a sense, and Milei. I don't know if people remember seeing Elon Musk when he got up on stage with the big chainsaw. I don't remember even what it was. That must have been Doge related back when he was in the government for 2 months, cutting all of the administration. But that was a Milei reference. When he ran for office the first time, he would get up and wield the chainsaw as a symbol of how he was going to slash government spending. And he's a real I guess I don't know what you call. He's very in favor of austerity. He has cut government spending to the extreme. to be fair, that's partially because Argentina had extreme inflation going into that election. I think it was like 300%. And so ex- looking for an extreme solution to an extreme problem was relatively popular. And he has all the same kind of personality and background benefits that Trump has had, really bombastic, really crude, not particularly sophisticated in his messaging. And but he talks about the things that regular folks care about. And was able to win on that. But when you slash government spending, you often create recession, which is essentially what he did. Lots of people in poverty, jobs of, lots of people who are unemployed. The economy really started to tank. So heading into the election in October, it looked like he was likely to lose. So the big news for us was that Trump intervened, and the quick headline is that we gave Argentina $40 billion heading into that election. And the administration even said explicitly, yeah, we're trying to help our political ally make sure that he can continue to win the election. To be honest, like, it's not necessarily such a bad thing that we would support a neighboring country that's in economic collapse, which would certainly affect us. The argument is also, if we didn't do it, China would do it. And, do we want China to continue to build relationships with South American allies? Probably not. So, like, it's not that doing it was in itself noteworthy or something that everybody would be angry about. But it happened during the middle of the government shutdown, when SNAP benefits were just about to end for, I think it's like 12 million Americans. SNAP benefits are food stamps. So you had many Americans about to be pushed into poverty because Trump wouldn't step in and protect those benefits. He could have made sure that they were going to be paid even during the government shutdown. So you've got that happening. And then he's sending all of this money to his buddy and ending USAID, which is other, foreign aid, which is leading to the death of millions of people around the world. So it's the hypocrisy, really, that is the problem. And it's a signal. I mean, I mentioned earlier about Hungary. Trump has made it very clear that he is happy to intervene to support his far-right allies around the world. And they actually released the national security strategy, the U.S. national security strategy. I think it was finally published, I think yesterday, even though it had been expected the month before. And it says explicitly in there, like in our national security strategy, that we will support our his political allies, particularly in Europe. So I think it's a signal to me more than anything else of what's to come.
Well, let's. I've maybe saved the best till last. So I don't know the best, but certainly the nation that's the closest to you, because you're in it, the United States. And I want to start with the Democrats. And whilst I was over there for the US for the Dunn Street mission, it was the government shutdown was happening, and it ended. And the circumstances upon which it ended divided a lot of folks on the left. And I'm really keen to get a sense of your thoughts on that. Did those senators, those Democratic senators that crossed the floor to support the bill to end the shutdown, did they do the right thing? Was the shutdown a pointless exercise? What are your reflections on it with a bit of time?
Yeah, and I'm probably a little outside the mainstream on this, so what most Democrats were saying coming out of it, certainly of our generation and leanings, is that, it was an absolute disaster that they ended the shutdown, because the shutdown was really tanking Trump's numbers and the Republicans. The gambit going into a shutdown is always, who is it going to damage more? The Republicans thought that it would damage us. But of course, the Republicans have all of the levers of power in government. So it was very easy to tell the story that this was really down to Trump failing to negotiate. And at the same time, he was traipsing around the world. He was out of the country, and people were able to make a lot of hay out of that. That, like, the government's shut down. We don't have, the air traffic controllers aren't being paid, and he's out roaming around the Middle East. So ending the shutdown when it was so damaging to Republicans in that moment, and we didn't get what Democrats were really holding out for, which was trying to make sure that there was a vote to I'm trying to think exactly what the mechanism was, but basically the issue is that all of our health insurance costs are going to go up dramatically in the new year because of the big beautiful bill that was passed this summer. The subsidies, I think, for health insurance would end at the end of the calendar year. Everybody's insurance premiums would go way up. It'd be still will be, very expensive for Americans because we didn't get a vote on that. Nothing has happened in Congress to protect lower costs. That's what Democrats were fighting for. We didn't get it. Why did we end it? I tend to think that we got probably as much as we were going to get out of it. We were headed into Thanksgiving. People would have really started to suffer, I think, if the SNAP benefits had really ended. And people have short memories. Nobody is going to remember next year that the shutdown ended in October instead of December. And the fact that we didn't get the health insurance subsidies, if that actually goes into effect, it's going to be incredibly damaging to the Republicans when it comes time for midterms next year. So I think strategically, I don't know that it was actually such an enormous mistake. Would I have ended it in that moment? Probably not. But there was a lot of pearl clutching.
Yeah, I had some arguments when I was over there with Aussie mates that live in the States, but certainly are clued in on the whole domestic politics. Mm-hmm. And what I took from it, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, I just felt like the Republicans didn't give a shit. Like, I didn't think that they cared about the consequences, because the Democrats were making the argument, this shutdown, because you won't negotiate on healthcare, this shutdown is hurting your own voters in your own constituencies in red states. Surely this is there's a moral argument here for you to come and negotiate. And I don't know whether that was being felt by, Republican Congress people that aren't, the speaker. So I don't know whether they were doing media and saying, oh, yeah, no, you're right, we are sort of, or if they were just a very tight group. But Speaker Johnson, when he got up every day, I was just saying to friends, he doesn't care. He just doesn't care. And Trump looked like he didn't care either. As you said, he was swanning around the Middle East. Like, they looked so disinterested in this.
Yeah, no, there were Republicans who were very frustrated, and because they have constituents who are affected by both the health insurance premium increases and the end of SNAP benefits. So I think even Marjorie Taylor Greene, as sort of the beginning of her turn to the left, I don't know. One of the things that she was arguing about was like that the Republicans needed to take both of these issues seriously. Yeah. So there were Republicans who were going to have to defend this when it comes around to the midterms, who were arguing not necessarily for making a deal or for giving the Democrats a win, but just like at least coming together to negotiate. But like you said, it was the leader who was in lockstep with the president, who did not want to be seen to give the Democrats a win, and maybe really was checked out. I mean, I don't know. I tend to think that's impossible, but he was really enjoying all of the plaudits he was getting around the world in that moment. And so I'm sure it was very easy to ignore the negative, which seems to be a real specialty of his.
So the other thing that happened just recently, obviously, was, it's in an off-cycle year, but there are a number of elections that, people were interested in. And I guess we're also desperate to look at some good news that there were good results in Virginia and New Jersey, from memory. Is that right?
Yeah.
And obviously there was and they seem to be overshadowed by a mayoral election in New York City. But I just want to get your thoughts on those elections, and what are the key takeaways do you think that Democrats can take ahead of the midterms next year?
Yeah, I think the broad takeaway for me is pick the right candidate for your district. So Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey and Abigail Spanberger in Virginia, they're actually both pretty centrist. They come from national security backgrounds. One of them is a Navy pilot. The other was a security, like a intelligence officer. They talked, I think, almost exclusively about cost of living issues in their states, and were able to win not just a little bit, but like really blowout wins by, I think, between 10 and 15 percentage points between the two states. So we did a great job of finding candidates that fit the districts. Same thing with Mamdani in a sense. Obviously, he's far to the left on social issues from those two candidates, but he also actually was really mostly laser focused on cost of living issues, and he fits the district. Now, I mean, it's a little bit tricky to say that Democrats did that because, of course, our candidate was Cuomo, or, well, in the primaries, Mamdani was the Democrat, but everybody sees Cuomo, who ran as an independent because he lost the primary, sees him as the establishment candidate, and he was a terrible candidate, but he didn't win, So I feel like that was a victory too. I don't see that as a negative for us.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing the media coverage, particularly here in Australia, and the interest level from folks on the left. People who listen to this show, members of the Labor Party, activists, super excited about the election of Mamdani. And we've spoken a bit about it on the show while we're over there. David Feeney and I, when we do a regular episode with a former politician, Labor politician, and my old boss there for a while, him and I had a big argument about Mamdani. And normally we agree on most things, right? And I just made the argument that he ran a good campaign. Like, whether you agree with him on his politics, he ran a good campaign. Whereas David wasn't having any of it. And he listens to this show as well when he's not on the show. Hello, David. But I guess the central point that he was trying to make was, but let's not take too much out of it. This was an election in a very, very, very blue city. And this isn't something that can be replicated across purple districts, to win back either the House or the Senate or even the presidency. And I tend to agree with him on that. But to my point as well, it still was a good campaign. Like, a good campaign is a good campaign. The content, the ads that they did, the organizing they did, the messages they did, and how it connected to that electorate, to your point before around it, they ran it on cost of living, right? That's good campaigning.
Yeah. I 100% agree. I think you're both right. I think he ran an exceptional campaign. He was an extraordinary candidate. He spent his money on the right things, which was communicating through digital, especially organic social media, really focused on cost of living issues. Do I agree with every single one of his little policy nuggets that he, put out originally? No, not necessarily. But actually, when you heard him talk in more detail about how things would be executed, he managed to show that he was incredibly thoughtful. He pivoted away from some of the further left social things that he had said in previous campaigns, or just, in life, which meant that he was able to moderate to make sure that he could appeal to a broader audience. I think he was an extraordinary candidate, and that many of the things that he's doing can be done by other candidates, but it needs to be tailored to the district. So it doesn't, you don't say exactly the same thing. We're not going to get somebody who self-identifies as a democratic socialist in, like, Oklahoma, but talking about cost of living issues and communicating in ways that people are actually going to see, because it's the way that everybody communicates now, is absolutely the recipe that everybody needs to follow.
Yeah. So what are your takeaways from what we've just discussed here? And summarize it in 3 words. No, I'm joking. No, what are you taking away from this conversation when we look across the globe? And I know that we haven't covered, the whole continent.
Yeah.
I will point out, because I'm in the Caribbean right now, St. Lucia had elections last week and the Labor Party won in a landslide because one of the organisers I'm organising with right now said that the Labor Party have now basically cleaned the island up, and it's a sea of red. So obviously, social democratic parties are doing very well in some places and not in others. And I know that a lot of times people say, we're seeing such a growth in far right politics. But what are you taking away from when we sort of look at this snapshot of elections across the globe?
Yeah, this is always such a good exercise for me too, Stephen, because I hadn't really consolidated these ideas in my head before this conversation. But a couple things. Traditional parties are on the decline unless they find ways to essentially signal that they're no longer traditional. So finding a candidate who is unusual or using modern ways of communicating. Otherwise, it's going to be the new outsider parties that are doing well. I think populism is obviously a winning recipe for nearly every party and candidate, whether it's economic populism, which is, I think, what you're seeing on the left. Unfortunately, ethno-nationalist populism is also on the rise and doing well in many places. But in both cases, they are really reacting against this sense of a corrupt elite that is only looking out for themselves. So whoever is able to win that messaging war essentially is the team that's going to win. And I think those are really the big key lessons for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if I can add 2 more to that as well, and I think this is, and the first one has actually come out of this conversation. It's not something I thought about going into this episode, but good candidates are so crucial. I know that sounds silly to say out loud, right? But there's been times where we've won elections where you're going, the candidate hasn't been that great, but basically our message has been good and we've got our stuff out, right? But good candidates are just worth so much to electoral fortune. So that's the first thing I've taken out of today's conversation. And the second one is, and it's more of a curiosity, and I'm thinking more about it for our folks in Europe is, and particularly our folks on the left, are our comrades keeping up with the advancements and sophistication of political or electoral campaigns? It's something that stuck with me in all of my jaunting around Europe earlier in the year and meeting with folks and someone said to me in one of the countries, they said the far right own social media in this country. That they've almost conceded it to them. And I'm like, why are you doing that? Like, it was almost like they were just basically saying, no, well, as you know, social media is a far right, that they own that, but that's their space. And I was like, well, why? No, that doesn't have to be that way. It's not. And they said, obviously, it's like that in Australia as well. I said, no, not at all. Like, in fact, I think we beat the Tories at the last campaign. In this campaign battle on social media. Why are we conceding that? It struck me that in a way that I thought, we need to get together again and hang out with each other and say, hey, how can we all learn off of each other, but also how can we lift the bar and the quality of the campaigns that you're running in all the different areas? Most of them aren't doing field. Most of them aren't organising for a start.
Yeah, right.
What's going on there?
Well, just going back to the digital piece, I mean, that it really drives me nuts that this is the narrative. I mean, it's true in this moment, but we used to own digital communications. Obama was really the first social media and digital communications president. But at least in the US, and I'm curious if you think this is true elsewhere, because I know that it's a little different. But I think part of the issue here is that we are a victim of our own success in early digital comms because we have been so laser focused on data collection and targeting, and the way that we essentially design all of our strategy is based on the voter file, which was an extraordinary advancement for us in 2008 and 12, and the way that we've used it to really great ends for a long time. But you can't really target people in the same way with modern social and digital tools the way that you could even 5-10 years ago. But so many Democrats are so like religiously tied to the van. And well, if it's not in the van, and we're not even going to try it, and we're not going to communicate with people if it's outside of, if we're not able to match it back. So we're just not even doing the things that the Republicans are doing, which is the way that you actually reach most voters. Obviously in Europe, with GDPR, the rules are different, the data that you're able to collect and the way that you're able to use it. But actually, I've spent a lot of the last 12 years trying to help Europeans do more of what we were doing. So I'm curious if they've managed to find ways to kind of have the best of both worlds or not from your perspective.
Yeah, and you're right. GDPR is a barrier to connections with folks online, but there are other ways in which we can connect with people, and sometimes knocking on their door and having a conversation with them or bringing them into our spaces is also just as impactful. Katie Parsons, this has been fun.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it.
Me too. It's always fascinating.
Yeah, and we've got a big year next year. We've got the midterms. I know that we'll have you back on the show to get us ready for that. So be ready for the call to start to talk about that, and otherwise have a great break over the winter for you guys, the summer for us. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and all the other things, and we wish you the best of success in 2026.
Thank you so much. You too. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. Enjoy Jamaica.
Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.